Mike Cintolo, Chief Analyst of Cabot Growth Investor and Cabot Top 10 Trader. I'm here with your Cabot Weekly Review, recording this late Friday morning as usual on October 24th. So it's been another hectic but positive week for the market. As I record this, there was a well-received inflation report this morning, and so a lot of indexes are either out to new highs, some of them are kind of testing their old highs, but either way, top-down evidence remains positive, intermediate-term trend remains up. It's not the first inning of the advance, of course, but the buyers continue to show up where they should. We've even seen the broad market, which gave some, like a yellow flag, I'd say, for the second half of September and early October. That seems to be getting better. I wouldn't say all clear quite yet, but certainly on the right path. Defensive stocks haven't done much, so on and so forth. So from that perspective, things still continue to look good as they have for a while now. Under the hood, though, it's definitely trickier. Not bad, not bearish, just trickier, which makes sense given the run we've had given earnings season. We have seen a couple of breakdowns this week. We've also seen some of the really high flyers, and I'll show you a couple of them, pull back 30%. Now, they've had such big runs at a 30% pullback drop. Didn't break the stock, and now they're bouncing, but I think that will be something key to watch here in the next couple of weeks. Is the risk-on sentiment still there, or do they bounce and then kind of fade again and hit lower lows and have a real correction, okay? Meanwhile, though, you still have a ton of stocks, like I've been saying for a while. There's a ton of stocks that really haven't done much inside and outside of growth for the last 2 or 3 months, even though the major indexes have kind of ground higher. And we have earnings season, and I think, if things go well, there could be a ton of names that I think could be just beginning fresh intermediate term advances if we get, gap ups and things like that. Of course, maybe these are tops and you get gap downs and breakdowns, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. Right now, still taking things on a stock by stock basis, leaning bullish, but want to see how things go here with earnings season in the next 2 or 3 weeks. In Cabot Growth Investors Model Portfolio, we got knocked out of a couple of things, one of which is snapback, but we got knocked out of a couple of things. We're 43% in cash. I might redeploy some of that next week. There's already been 1 or 2 earnings winners that I'm kind of interested in here. Plus, we have a couple of stocks that themselves look like we could buy more of. But we'll just have to see how it goes. Again, it's been kind of a ping-pong environment where you come on here one day or 1 week and say, geez, things are really testing the top end. They look like they're going to break out. If we get a couple of good days, we could really be buying. And then a week or 2 later, you're saying, wow, we're near the low end of the range. We could be breaking down. So right now, more optimistic than not for sure, but let's see how things play out during earnings season. Okay, let's hop into the charts. As always, I'm using a program called Market Surge. You can learn more at marketsurge.com. It's a product of Investors Business Daily. So the indexes, what I said in the intro is the buyers keep showing up where they quote unquote should, okay? And if the intermediate term trend is going to remain up, and it's not going to remain up forever, of course, but you tend to get buyers near the 50-day line, give or take. Doesn't mean you can't dip below it for a day or two, but something like that. And that's what we've seen. This is the NASDAQ. Obviously, now we're resuming higher to new highs today. We'll see. Maybe we go to new highs and then reverse and then come back down. It's been that sort of choppy ping-pong environment, like I said, but clearly on an intermediate term basis, the trend remains up and pretty clean. I mean, we've had 1 or 2 days here and there where you get, or even a half a day where it gets kind of ugly, it gets a little tedious, but things kind of hold support. And then obviously, whether it's the sellers dissipating or the buyers stepping up, the things turn up. Okay, S&P 500, same thing, new highs today as I record this. Still not a ton of daylight, just to say, between the 50-day line. So, if we fell, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Actually, give me a second, talk amongst yourselves. But if we fell 3% next week, I'm not saying we're going to, but if we did, it would probably be intermediate term trend back on the fence, maybe even negative, depending how it goes. Okay, so it's not a ton of daylight, but I mean, new highs is new highs. I'm not gonna, as a trend fall, I'm not gonna argue that. Small caps not quite as strong, but still new highs here. You can see they pretty much, like a lot of things, really small caps had a pop and didn't do anything from, this was late August, until this week. Now, ideally, this is the start of an advance. And I would just note, this is very short term. I'm not concluding anything based on this, but relative to the S&P 500, we've seen a little bit of a tick up here as we move higher. So let's see if that can continue. Mid caps, close to new highs. Again, not a lot of daylight in here. Pretty much been chopping sideways, but let's see how it goes. And then the New York Composite, same sort. Oops, excuse me. NYC, if I can type correctly. There we go. Testing the old highs. Again, we come in next week, it's rejected, which is possible. Earnings season goes badly, something happens geopolitically, whatever, some tweets come out. But either way, we break down, you got to be prepared for it. So it's not like we're starting some fresh advance for the next 9 months. But like I said, the buyers continue to show up where they're supposed to, okay? Same kind of thing, just to, go through, this is the Momentum Fund, MTUM. It's just been kind of one of these things where it chops sideways, pops higher for a week or so, and then kind of just, went sideways here for another month and a half. Maybe ideally this is the start of a, lift period. But overall, one of those things, positive, but not, powerful. IBD 50 index, same sort of thing. It's been making some progress, but you can just kind of see it really hasn't been doing much here the last few weeks. So ideally, the last couple of days are start of a kind of a rush back into the market, rate cut hopes, whatever it is. But, I need to see more than, at this point, as I'm recording this, a day and a half, okay? Moreover, it's just, I don't want to keep saying the same thing each week, but, financials have come back up here. But again, you're not seeing a lot of progress with a lot of these sort of broad sectors. Transports, again, not the biggest tell anymore of the market or anything, but IYT, XLF, XLI, industrials, a little bit better here, but still, really not a hell of a lot of progress here for a couple months. So this is what I mean. If we do get a good earnings season, if we do see upside follow through in some of these names, even if the major indexes say they kind of cool it, I'm not saying they sell off 10%, but say they kind of go sideways, it wouldn't shock me if you get some of this under the hood stuff to kind of, break out and maybe start their own 1 or 2 or 3 month runs. You know what I mean? RSP, this is the equal weight S&P 500. Again, a little bit better, but not a lot of, it hasn't been doing that much here in the last 3 months. Net, it's probably up a couple of percent, which is better than down, but it's not setting the world on fire. So overall, positive, not powerful from a top-down perspective. Last thing, as always, like to look at the XLP. It has perked up here off the lows, and it's kind of hanging in there. It's not like it, met with a ton of selling pressure like it did here, but certainly no rush into defensive stocks. They continue to pretty much underperform the market. That could change at any time, but so far so good. What we did see this week, and I'll just kind of get into individual stocks now. Like this is Bloom Energy, BE. A lot of these either HPC, high performance computing hosters, basically, they're getting power and all the infrastructure for the neo clouds and the hyperscalers. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but a lot of these things have just gone ballistic. Or Bloom Energy, again with the infrastructure, power, that sort of thing. They'll be using their fuel cells. The stocks obviously had a huge move. So, this pullback right here is not to the 25-day line, is not, abnormal at this point. But it is probably, actually this one did have a drop here, but for a lot of these names, and we'll go through a couple of them, this was about 30%, I think, from high to low. So it's a little bit of a little bit of a change in character. Like, okay, now we're getting a real pullback here. And then what happens from here? Is that it? Was that the shakeout low? And we bounce, and maybe it comes down, but it kind of does one of these things, and then it's fine. Totally could happen. If so, that would be good, in my opinion. It would be a positive for risk-on sentiment as a whole and for growth stocks as a whole. If, however, you see this kind of shock day, now we're bouncing. Okay, we came about halfway back, just eyeballing it here. It kind of comes in next week and boom, 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 and you see that from a bunch of different stocks. Of course, this one has Bloom Energy has earnings on the 28th, so it's coming up quick. So, but if you see it around, not just one name, but 3, 4 of these high flyers, that could be, again, sort of more of a bigger picture change in character, at least for the intermediate term. IREN, IREN, same sort of thing. You can see the stock's just gone, nuts here. And then you had a very sharp, I think it was about 30-35%. Now you're bouncing back. So let's see what happens from here. A bounce was going to happen. So here's the bounce. Is it the bottom, or do we, build a bottom? Do we crack down? So just something to watch. Applied APLD, Applied Digital. A lot of these like Bitcoin miners kind of shifted their infrastructure now to be, in terms of the AI infrastructure build out. So that's really what has caused them to thrive. Not a lot of sales and earnings here, which makes them a little bit more speculative, but the stocks have obviously had huge runs, big pullback. And again, these are just 3 names. I'm sure well, maybe you're not, but if you've been following, you probably know some others. So I would use these as sort of a secondary clue in terms of, like I said, risk on sentiment, both for the market, but also for the AI group as a whole, okay? Elsewhere, like kind of more well-situated companies, this is Vertiv, VRT. I mentioned this before, kind of a reset base where it spent, a a long time not really doing too much. Okay, big correction, big comeback, then it kind of consolidated again, kind of resetting the overall advance from 2023, I think. And then we break out 3 or 4 weeks ago. It did report earnings this week, not to get too in the weeds, but you had some of these shakeouts here. Selling on strength, gaps up, comes down, closes mid-range, whatever, but it holds a 25-day line, doesn't do anything wrong, and now it's back at new highs. This one is on my watch list, and I am intrigued by it. I mean, some of these things, once they kind of, it's not the freshest story. It's, that it's kind of started in 2023. But if the long-term story still has further to run, we've seen this with all these mega trends throughout the years. It doesn't mean there can't be another good, long-lasting leg up, I guess, in names like this. We'll see how it goes. CRDO, this is kind of interesting, CRDO. Now, CRDO was clearly one of the big connectivity winners here. Again, these are just very unusual patterns where the stock has a big move up, a huge move down with the market, and then just goes straight up from there. That's very, honestly, kind of failure prone. But it obviously worked this year. So it's clearly a leader. And now we've got this sort of 5-week consolidation in here. There is kind of a, I wouldn't say total volume cluster, but this sort of decline off the top tends to lead to some resistance. But nevertheless, just stepping back, it basically pulled back, shook out below the 50-day line a couple times, looked like it was kind of done. But again, the buyers kind of show up when they need to. This is kind of the theme of a lot of these things so far. It's like not pretty, good correction, 175 to 130, and now it's kind of popping up. So I'm not sure exactly what to do with it. I wouldn't, that's not the point of this video anyway, but kind of an interesting, potential fresh base in here. Maybe it needs, just more time. Maybe it doesn't, but anyway, something to watch. Broadcom, AVGO, mentioned this before. Obviously a liquid leader, certainly looks good on the weekly chart. And since earnings right here, it's had now, this is 6 week of a base. They've had volatility in here. This was the shakeout a couple of weeks ago. The next day they reported a deal with OpenAI. Then it pulled back, but it's kind of acting well. There hasn't really been a lot, there's a little bit of selling here at the beginning, but not a lot of selling. And you kind of have this nice little shelf in here. So we'll see how that goes. Lumentum, they have earnings on November 4th. So just something to be aware of. But I mentioned this before, again, with one of these, straight down, straight back up patterns. But the last 5 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, depending on how you want to measure it, it's been consolidating in here, popping to new highs as I record this today. So let's see how that goes. Of course, earnings will probably tell the intermediate tail here in 11 total days. So about a week. What is this? I said November 4th. So yeah, early November will be the tell, but certainly a proper pattern. Okay. Outside of sort of AI tech, we have seen some movement. So this is aerospace, defense. This is Hexcel, HXL. It's not the fastest mover. It has in the past had a history of trending. But pretty good numbers in here, pretty good estimates for next year, nice flat base. There's a couple others in the group too that have reacted well to earnings. And you can just see overwhelming volume here yesterday after earnings. So kind of an interesting chart there. Morgan Stanley, I showed you financials. I think I showed you this last week too. Morgan Stanley intrigues me. It's not, it's not going to be your fastest horse, of course. But it's just been trending higher. Again, the 10-week line here, the orange line on this chart continues to offer support, that's quote unquote normal. I mean, if that happens, that's usually a sign that institutions are nibbling, supporting their positions and adding to their positions, obviously, on dips. Okay, reacted well to earnings, did pull back with the market here, but no big deal, and now kind of following through on the upside. Okay, a couple in software I am watching closely. Snowflake, I've mentioned this a bunch of times. Not a lot of, it's made progress. I can't say it's like no net progress, right? I mean, it's gone up the last few months, don't get me wrong. It just hasn't been an easy ride. So if you just bought it and closed your eyes, which I don't recommend doing with these stocks, but if you did, you would come out ahead. To me, it looks like maybe this big earnings reaction with this huge volume, this was back just before Labor Day, kind of changed the character of the stock. Not that it was off and running, but now it's kind of built this sort of thing. 250 seems a little sticky here. Earnings aren't out till probably late November. But if it can kind of just up and get going, that would be interesting. MongoDB, sort of the same thing. You kind of have an earnings gap, same time frame they report, same time of the cycle, which is kind of, in this time will be around Thanksgiving. A little bit of a run up, and now this kind of nice tight consolidation. The stock hasn't done anything wrong. Moving averages are catching up. So let's see what happens. Pretty good setups. This is what I mean. There's a lot of setups out there. I wouldn't say, a couple of bad days, you'd say, ooh, geez, I'm not so sure about that one. But if it can get going, then, you got some new merchandise. SOFI, financial, it's had a big run from the lows for sure. But again, kind of like Lumentum, it's sort of obviously a different animal. This is a bank, but a growth-oriented bank. But still, 5-week consolidation in here holds the 50-day line. You can see very choppy up and down, but can it kind of get going here? Earnings next week on the 28th will probably tell the tale. Zscaler. So the relative performance line, you like to see ideally a stock consolidate for a few weeks, few months, depends what the market's doing. But if, when it breaks out, whether it's on earnings or whatever, you kind of like to see this relative performance line sort of at new highs along with the stock, ideally. It doesn't always happen that way. So we'll see what happens, but Zscaler was definitely a leader coming out of the market low. It was shot out of a cannon. We made good money in top 10. I mean, just look at the weekly chart. I mean, just week after week after week, big volume after earnings. I mean, it had it all. And then it just died. I mean, it didn't die, but it just stalled out. I will say a couple of things if you want to get in the weeds. If you don't, just click forward like 20 seconds. Tightness at the lows here. Tight weekly close is usually a good sign. It's hard to see on this. It's probably easy on the daily. Right here was after earnings in very early September. Shook out to new lows and then recovered. That's kind of often is commonly seen among winning stocks, kind of shakes out the remaining weak hands. And now it's kind of chopping higher and again, trying to break out here. We'll see what happens. Maybe it needs time. It doesn't have earnings again until like late November, so that's not in the way. But kind of an interesting pattern, maybe cybersecurity trying to reassert itself. Just a couple more. Wayfair. Again, I'm not sure I'd say it's a leader. It's not like the most liquid, like well-sponsored name, but Wayfair came up from the dead here. And again, you kind of have this sort of 5 to 8 week consolidation, including a big shakeout a couple weeks ago. We had it as a setup in top 10 saying, hey, if it got going, buy it. It never did, so we just never did anything with it. But now it's kind of set up again here, or maybe trying to set up again, and if it could follow through, it could be interesting. Earnings again next week, October 28th. And last but not least is Boot Barn, on the retail side. So again, let's see if the market can broaden out a little bit. Long period of no net progress here. It has been sort of, 5 steps forward, 4 steps back sort of thing the last few months. You can see boom, 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 boom. Okay. And now back up to new highs. They have earnings October 29th next week. So again, a lot of these are just going to be kind of like, hey, keep an eye on them. If they, if something's out to new highs, it doesn't have to gap up 20% to buy it, obviously. But if this thing can kind of hold near new highs, maybe above round number resistance at 200, you get through earnings, the numbers are good, estimates go up, all of a sudden you might be cooking with gas, okay? So there's quite a few setups, stocks that are working, things to keep an eye on right now. Back to the market, I think the big thing here is stay flexible. I mean, we've had a good run. I'm not someone who says, I wasn't back here saying, oh, you got to sell your stocks. The trend is up. The trend could continue up, and in fact, big picture, I continue to think the indexes have a good amount of runway ahead of them, okay? At the same time, we did have a shock a couple of weeks ago. Is there going to be another shock here? October's not done with us yet, sort of thing. Is there going to be some rotation? Is there something that affects AI? We're at that sort of stage where some rumors come out, really affect stocks, things move around. But between the high flyers and earnings season, with all the stocks that are set up, or maybe just kind of probing to new highs, I think there's going to be a big, feedback mechanism for all of us here in the next 2 to 3 weeks in terms of, number one, how healthy the market is, and number two, if it remains healthy, what are going to be the stocks that are really going to lead the way higher, whether it's just AI or whether things broaden out. Okay, that's all the time I have for today. As always, thanks for listening, and be sure to come by again next week for another Cabot Weekly Review.